Right, I've got my little paper. Well, hello, Tracy.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you? Welcome to Alice in Gothic Land.
Thank you, Alice, for hosting me in your wonderful land.
Thank you. You're the first guest, so I think, as you know, I'm a little bit nervous, but I've been a guest myself before in radio shows, and I've never really run the show. So well, let's see how it goes. I'm really happy to have you here, and well, we have in common our passion for the Gothic, and well, for me, you are one of the first people I started talking to when I first started in Twitter, and I saw your work and I thought, well, this is great. And really, there was something about your writings, your blog, that was really welcoming. So, well, before we go into the Gothic, and because I get really excited, well, tell us about you a little bit. I would like for you to introduce yourself, tell us what you normally do, so people can listen and see your background.
No problem at all. And thank you so much again for having me. So my name is Tracy Fahey. I am a writer. My great love is the Gothic. So all of my books tend to be tinged with the Gothic. I've produced 2 short story collections. My third one has just been announced for release today, which I'm very excited about. My first collection, The Unheimlich Maneuver, was nominated for a British Fantasy Award in 2017. I really work mostly in short fiction, and I've been published in about 30 or so anthologies in kind of Ireland, England, US, Australia. And I've also written a little novel called The Girl in the Fort, which is aimed at a middle grade audience. So that's me, Gothic to the core. My academic interest is in it, and my fiction interests are in it. So there you go.
It's great. I love it. But you're also teaching, yes? You also teach at university and art. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have had the privilege of doing a PhD in the Gothic, which was wonderful, as you can imagine. So now I teach classes in the contemporary Gothic in folk horror, and I also supervise postgraduate students, and I run a research centre and a fine art department. So
you're well immersed in the Gothic, so your day is just Gothic all over.
Very much. I wake up in a flock of bats, typically.
Oh, it's great. No, it's lovely. It really is. It's impressive. It's impressive. I have to say that, yes, we met through thanks to Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that for the audience, that you have already been collaborating with me. I was really lucky last year that you gave us your time with my classes, because we wanted to get the students, the people learning English as a second language, we wanted to get them immersed in the language, to learn it in context through some kind of literature that they also felt close to, as in not an old, dead author. Yeah, you and I, we love dead authors, but people needed to feel, I wanted them to feel something closer to their everyday lives and more recent stories. And so it was really nice that you helped out in these little sessions. So with one group, with a couple of groups we put them together, you remember, and we talked about this book. I'm going to show it. We talked about The Girl in the Fort. And
that was such a pleasure, Alicia. I mean, we had such a wonderful session, and the students asked some questions that I really hadn't thought about before. So it was a fantastic kind of opportunity for me to actually speak directly to a bunch of readers who I'd really written for, And I remember thinking when I was doing it, this is crazy. Who would have thought I'd be doing a webinar in Spain, after some really nice conversations on Twitter with Gothic Alice? So it just shows you should always reach out and chat to people. You never know what might happen.
No, that's true. It's the collaboration. We were talking about collaborating with each other just before opening the microphone. We were talking about collaborating, which is something that people maybe still in some areas, they're very scared of sharing their own experiences, even supernatural experiences, because the Gothic is so connected also with people's experiences with the supernatural. Where I take part in some radio programs here in Barcelona in Estudio Oculto. It's called, I'm going to advertise as well, Radio Penedès. And they concentrate and they talk mainly about people who are missing. They talk about UFOs. They talk about the paranormal. They talk about all this. And sometimes I am a guest there and I bring the literary side of things and we find examples, which is very nice. But it's true that people sometimes fear talking about the Gothic somehow. Maybe that's why they don't know it that well. They think, well, this is just for the films, but they don't see examples in books, or they don't know where they are. Which takes me to the first question of today. For you, what is Gothic literature? I get asked this question so many times. But how would you define Gothic literature?
It's the $64 million question, really, because I always say sometimes it's easier to say what the Gothic isn't rather than what it is, because it's such a broad church. But the Gothic for me is, when we talk about the literature, it's almost a mode of writing, that is of horror, it's of terror, it's of unease, but it's also about kind of silences, about marginalization, about voiceless kind of characters. It kind of swims in this very liminal territory where you're not quite sure what's going on, but also it's always almost inevitably about the recurrence of the past and the present. In the Gothic, nothing is ever dead, nothing is ever buried, everything resurrects.
Yeah, you think the other day I was creating a post, an article, and a video about trying to define Goth versus Gothic. Mm-hmm. This is where actually you came into the article and in the video as well. So, and for me, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but for me, in the cinema, we don't get Gothic cinema. We get horror, we get terror, we get gore, we get anything else. Mm-hmm. But we don't get Gothic cinema. However, we get ghost stories.
Yeah.
So would that be like the name, the label for the Gothic in the cinema, do you think?
I'm trying to think of some good Gothic examples in cinema. And I really think that for me, The Others was sublimely Gothic. Because it's in it especially, the home becomes a very liminal, strange place. It's extremely uncanny. But I also think amazing Spanish movies like The Orphanage, for example, for me, again, just magnificently Gothic, because in that movie, the site is haunted, the people are haunted, so it's not so much the traditional ghost story, although the Gothic kind of can be quite a traditional ghost story, but really it's about movies that are unsettling, that are strange, where nothing is quite certain.
Yeah. So it can actually, it gets everywhere, doesn't it? Sometimes you might even see a film that is not labeled as scary or supernatural, and yet if you see someone who believes in the supernatural, or that a soul or a spirit has come to visit them, in that autobiography film, for example, it can also have Gothic touches. If we have characters that believe that they've seen something, or that they experienced maybe because of a psychological moment, depression, but they might be the depression and psychological issues they get they get blended in with the paranormal, don't they? Which is what
or even I suppose in more concrete terms as well. You've got movies like Christopher Nolan's Memento, where the main character suffers from such dramatic memory lapses that the entire framework of the film is disjointed, mimicking his own kind of interior anxiety and dissolution. And for me, that's also extremely Gothic. Again, it keeps coming back to uncertainty for me. A lack of sureness about what you're doing, why you're doing it, why these things are happening. So.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It is. The more you analyze and the more you get to know it, you see that you can't escape it, which is the point of the Gothic, isn't it? You can't really escape it, and that's beautiful because you cannot down either. So it's great. You've mentioned two very important terms that people also struggle with when it comes to defining the Gothic. You mentioned the uncanny. And you mentioned, well, I don't know if you mentioned it yet, but no, the uncanny is the one. The sublime is another term that people get confused, or they don't really know how to define it. So this takes me to the second question, the next question, which is, what aspect of the Gothic are you closer to and why? And you just mentioned the uncanny. You always...
I know, yeah.
But I would like you to tell us why the uncanny and in your words what it is, but also the origin of the word. Because I think you've done a lot of research based on Freud, and obviously your second, this wonderful other book that you sent me, and I'm so happy. I show it to everybody. I see to everybody. This book is dedicated to me, personally to me. I love it.
I'm so happy. I'm totally obsessed with the uncanny. I'll just be honest about it. And I think for me, it's such a wonderful and terrible idea. Mm-hmm. The idea of something familiar that kind of arises in an unfamiliar circumstance. So really, this whole idea became popular through a series of essays in the early 20th century, the most famous of which is Freud's essay on the unheimlich, or the uncanny. But it's such a wonderful essay because it explores all the myriad meanings of uncanny. And even the word itself, unheimlich, is a German word meaning unhomely, as you very well know. But it also has these connotations of, a home that's enclosed, that's secret. So even without this transformation or this strange recurrence that's happening, we have the sense that we already have something which is secret, which is strange. I do apply it a lot to the way that I kind of construct and deconstruct homes, especially in my fiction, because Freud talks about the uncanny home as being, if you like, the epicenter of what he's describing, because what is more dear to us or more familiar to us than our own home? And therefore, when something happens in that home, when something goes wrong, when secrets are revealed, they shake you to your foundations. So, I guess that's why I started to explore the uncanny as a really powerful way to investigate how this occurs, this strange transformation.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I was reading just before talking to you. I was reading this story, Possession, and that very much. This is really how you see the home. Well, one of the sides we will talk about it in a moment. The home can be many things, not just the physical place, but also your body. Your home is the home of your own soul, and when that gets ill, becomes ill for external problems that you can't control. That's really when you lose it again, and the Gothic invades you, doesn't it? But it's beautiful, this one, and really scary, which is, you've got that touch that I really love, And I find difficult to find, it's redundant what I have to say, but it's difficult to find in authors that kind of, that fear that is not described literally with all the characteristics. It suggests so much, the text, that you put the monster there. So they always say this, it's better to suggest than to describe, doesn't it? For writers, they say, talk less and show more.
Show, don't tell. Yeah.
And it's brilliant. I think you do this brilliantly. I'm a really fussy reader because I get distracted with thoughts if the writer takes me to a lot of long paths to get around, which is a different type of reader. I get distracted easily. So I need that tension. And you have that point. You made me be there tense, thinking, what was happening? And my mind starts creating alternatives. And then when I can't wait to see the end because I want to see what end you're giving it. But it's fantastic how this home, in this specific chapter, this story, the home has this power over the person. And I've never seen that done before. So...
well, I think of that story, there's a line, something that like... we think that we possess houses, and in fact, the reverse is true. And I guess for me, I'm kind of obsessed with kind of home as both a place of sanctuary and a place of unease. And I always have this very dual perspective because, you see, for me, horror isn't about the monster under the bed. For me, true horror is, it's really mundane, it's really matter of fact. It's, what happens if I get sick? What happens if somebody I love, is ill or dying? What if I wake up in the morning and there's a strange person in my house? These are just very simple horrors. But I think when I write horror, I really sit with myself and I think, how would I feel if this were happening?
Yeah.
And that's what I try to translate.
Which is actually nice of you to, I think you're highly empathetic with situations and people's feelings. I've noticed that with The Woman Next Door from the, I'm going to show you all your books there.
Oh, wow.
See, I've got my Post-it notes as well because
Amazing. You're so prepared.
Well, I love it. And so in that story, I thought, you always think that how can other women understand what you go through when you go through certain things if they've never experienced those things? So for me, it was like, right, this is exactly how a woman who's just had a child feels like. And then when I talked to you, we're like, no, I've not experienced it, but it's high empathy that you have towards different people's situations or mindsets. It's great. And I think precisely this is one of the points of the Gothic that I really love, that we can trigger our empathy, and our society is lacking empathy. I see this with my students sometimes. They do not understand a text or they can't comprehend the text because they're not connecting with this text. But if it's well written and it's something that they like, the empathy is there. So then you are motivated and therefore you learn. But you have this touch of getting to people's nerves and uncomfortable points, these, what we say, they say in marketing, they call them the pain points. Yes.
Yeah. Well, in a weird way, I think the reason that I can do that is that I suffer from a lot of anxiety, and it's a curse, and sometimes it's a blessing when I'm writing, because I can feel other people's anxieties quite acutely. And I'm always drawn to people who are suffering from kind of a similar feeling.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly convenient in real life, but it does become an interesting place to go to when you're writing.
Yeah, that's true. I really love it. If you allow me, I want us to read one phrase from The Woman Next Door, because I think it's really Bronte, and I think you probably know which one I'm going to talk about. I'm going to read it. It says, and I just love this phrase from Wuthering Heights. Let me in. I thought this is just Wuthering Heights. He said, let me in. I'm ringing the doorbell frantically between repeated knocks. There's no answer. Sean is calling my name urgently over and over. I can look at him. And I thought, wow, that's so much like the Brontes. That's just Wuthering Heights. I just love that scene. I have it printed on a T-shirt.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's this vision, isn't it? It's the border. What is reality? What's not reality? And again, this is really well shown in this story. How you do this? Yeah, we can see the border, the frontier. They just meld. They just blend in the two worlds, which is another thing that the Gothic does.
Yeah, I think in the Gothic and with psychological horror, there's a huge importance to the moment before something happens. And that's what I'm drawn to again and again, helplessly, like a moth to a flame, is just to really extend that moment of terror when you think something's going to go wrong, but you're not quite sure, and you're plunged into panic. But at the same time, you're not sure if everything is in your head or whether things are actually going wrong in reality. So that moment you describe in The Woman Next Door is exactly one of those moments, because she doesn't know anything's happened, but she just feels with absolute and sickening certainty that something has.
Yeah. At the end, it's just like, oh.
Yeah. Well, that's why I call the book The Unheimlich Maneuver, because I was really interested in it being, all the stories are maneuvers. They're all situations where everything just pivots and it changes, and life will never be the same afterwards.
Yeah. And some of them, I have to say, they were uncomfortable, but beautifully uncomfortable, because you don't quite say it in all the words. Like, it's true that horror, and there might be, there are different levels, and some people are very visually, very descriptive. Probably in the 18th century or in Victorian times, when all the medical situation, when medicine started, and they were just taking bodies of the graves to dissect, and that's when we go understanding. Some of the books are really visual, the descriptions of goods coming out and limbs, but you don't do that, and you don't need to do that nowadays. And this is very interesting, because culturally, at that time, that was important to do that, because it was happening. Medicine was starting to be what we have nowadays. So they needed to do all those things. And nowadays, maybe we need more the suggestion. We don't need. We know what's coming with just a couple of descriptions and a look of someone's eyes, and you think, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And I have to say that some of the things were a little bit, ew, Tracy, what have you done here? It's a colorful book. We not just have the ghostly thing all the time. We can go into cannibalism, or we can go into harder things. And
I think that for all I say, I'm kind of preoccupied with mundane horror. I also quite like when things go badly askew. But my starting point is always the normal life. Establishing the kind of status quo, and then you just subvert it and you flip it. But your observations are so interesting. I always love talking about the Gothic with you.
Thank you.
But I think horror is quite a broad church. So I think kind of pulp horror, that horror you describe, blood and guts and visceral, I think for some people that is sublime horror. They love it. Because it comes from a really ancient legacy from the early Gothic novels, which are full of, assault and cannibalism and blood drinking and mysterious deaths and castles and spectres and everything. So the very first Gothics are very pulp, they're very in your face. it's only later that we get the term Gothic associated with a more subtle horror, which I think is quite interesting. But for me, the horror that really, really scares me is the lingering Gothic horror of somebody like Shirley Jackson. Just the power of her suggestion. Just that creepy feeling as you're reading it, that everything is dissolving in front of you. You're not quite sure who's telling the truth. You're not quite sure what is happening. It's wonderful.
Yeah, because your brain is doing all the work, really.
Oh, yeah.
And that is very individualistic. Everybody's is different. So the beauty of it. Yeah.
I remember reading The Haunting of Hill House and getting to that point when Eleanor, you know, and Theo are together, and there's all the banging coming from outside, and then the lights come on, and Eleanor realizes that Theo's hand, which she assumes she's been holding really, really tightly all along, is not the hand she's been holding. And she just cries out, kind of, whose hand was I holding? And at that point, I just shut the book. I was reading it in the house by myself, and I thought, I am so frightened. And it was so simple, such a simple idea.
Yeah, which is that the shock. Yeah, it's the unexpected. Yes, it's true. And it's like a very, I suppose, like a very old fear, isn't it? It's sometimes something that we have there since the beginning, since storytelling, since we were in the caves and we were hunting. Is that kind of, I can't see because it is dark, and if I get touched by anything, I'm going to be really scared because your imagination is doing that. So it's kind of an ancestral feeling.
And that's how a lot of our folkloric stories and our fairy tales come from as well. It's from that attempt to interpret darkness and threats and turn them into fables.
Yeah, which is it is sad, isn't it? It's something I've recently realized that we don't have. And last year we were talking with the group of the kids. You probably realize that we don't know our own folklore. And in a sense, in your case, you know the Irish in general. You do know your folklore very well. Or in general, I think you told me that people go to the pub for a drink and you tell stories.
Both stories, yes.
And we don't do this here. We don't really know. You know, I've been asking the kids for ages, why are we celebrating in Spanish la castañada? You know, just we celebrate the hazelnut day instead of Halloween. We do both. But they go, I don't know. And we have our own pagan tradition about this lady with, you know, and there are old ladies in the street roasting chestnuts, not, I always get them wrong, not chestnuts. But we don't know why. And I suppose at this point, we have the cultural and the historical background that is so heavy in our folklore and our stories. We can see that, for example, in Spain, there's this lack of Gothic history because we had Inquisition and we had the censorship later on with Frankism time. And although we have our own production of Gothic literature, a lot of the translated books didn't arrive to us because they had to go from England to France. And if we were lucky enough to get them translated, we got them. So in this sense, this is one of the questions and one of the points. I'm kind of jumping down our list, but I think it comes handy now to this personal concern. Sorry, I got a bit lost. I wanted to talk about the cultural, you know, how the Gothic text shows history. We can learn our history and other people's history and the culture and how the folklore gets there and how in the Irish history you've been like an outsider.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true. I think that the Gothic, you know, we can be quite generic about the Gothic and what the Gothic is, but the Gothic is also a regional and local and national entity, and every country there's a different flavor.
Yeah.
Because the Gothic, of course, has grown up and been shaped by the environmental factors, the political factors, the social factors. So in Ireland, I think I could spend my life trying to deconstruct what is Irish Gothic, but I'm going to give you some ideas.
Oh, great.
So first of all, our sense of the Gothic comes definitely from our folklore. Irish folklore is one of the most famous in the world. It's extremely rich. And part of that lies in our unfortunate kind of history of colonization, where the Irish language becomes the secret kind of language of the native peoples, even though the official English is English, kind of imposed by the colonizers. So our word for folklore is waelages, which translates as knowledge of the mouth. So that's the way knowledge and customs and traditions were passed on orally. And that's why Irish people, you ask any Irish person for a story, they will tell you one very obligingly. It is part of our tradition, it's part of our heritage. So I would say, but also because we have these passed on, a lot of the customs and traditions and superstitions are still quite live today. And a lot of those are to do with kind of danger and fear and uncertainties. This dark element of folklore is still very strong in Irish culture. So that's the first place that I feel that our sense of the Gothic comes from. And then, as I've mentioned, we've got kind of 700-800 years of colonization as well. And that's a very difficult period where the sense of identity becomes stripped away. The relationship with your home becomes stripped away because people are evicted, they don't have any security in their homes. So, but also then there's this question of, I am living in this country, but this country has a different official language. The people who run it, have no relationship with me. So it's that feeling of being dispossessed, disinherited, disenfranchised. There's quite a long period in which Catholics, for example, couldn't vote in Ireland. And all of these things, I suppose, makes the Irish nation a very Gothic nation, because historically it's quite voiceless, it's quite dispossessed, it's quite anxious. And I think it's from this cauldron as well that we have even the early Gothic classics. Although they're really written by the Anglo-Irish, the ruling class in Ireland, they're infused with this sense of unease because people who are writing them also don't feel any kind of firm hold on the country. So even kind of books like Dracula, although set in Transylvania, is it's haunted by this idea of cruel landlords, kind of ruined villages, this whole landscape of a devastated Ireland, kind of politically and socially, really reverberates through the pages.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing because it's true, isn't it, that the history makes literature, and we might get a history book with all the dates and specific names, but then in fiction we can manipulate or recreate or invent names and situations, but we still either voicing the unvoiced, as you said. We are trying to say, hello, there's something here, something happened. Maybe I'm inventing this story, but it's based on something else. And yes, you do have that. Oh, there was a bang. Was that you?
Yes, that was just from my end. I bumped over something. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
It wasn't uncanny.
We're just looking about the gossip. No, I think before I had a little light. Sometimes I had a little light behind me, and I'll have to check after when I look at the recording again. So often again that there's a name for them, like a little light.
Or a little orb.
I do, and I always kept seeing. And I saw it before, and I thought, no, not now, please, because I get creeped out.
No, I'm extremely happy to say that my home here is very unhaunted.
You know what? This house, we built this house And when I was reading, going back to the story from before, I was your story, I forget the names, I'm really bad with names, your possession story, it kind of reaffirmed a feeling that I recently had. I think I had it this week, because this house is not sat on any remains of any historical remains. There was nothing. It was fields. We built this house, literally. Some of these the walls we built them between Alistair and my husband and my dad. And I've always had this sense that there's some kind of energy in the house, which is like, it doesn't make sense, because I always say houses come with ghosts. But what if we are actually bringing these ghosts to the houses? And it made me think of this idea again when I read your story.
Yeah.
That maybe we are the ones, because we've had experiences. I had loss. Between my two children that you met today, I had an ectopic pregnancy that almost killed me. And then I had a twin pregnancy that didn't go to term. So sometimes, and then Alice's near-death experience too, I think we're producing our own ghosts and our own energies, which, so again, it's all very Gothic,
Yeah, but I think we're always haunted by our own memories. And I think we carry our ghosts with us. Absolutely. But even further than that, I'm convinced that there are just some people who, how shall I put it? People who are gifted in an area of perception that not everybody is. And I always liken it to, people who can play the piano by ear, or people who can magically go to a country and start to pick up the language immediately, There are a lot of centers in the brain that we haven't explored. And actually, one of my stories, Walking the Borderlines, is about kind of a meeting that takes place between two people. And it was based on something that happened to me when I was 20. And a friend I made, who I'm still good friends with to this day, which is rather wonderful. But he's just got this bizarre ability to be somewhere, and it's almost as if his presence provokes some kind of, how shall I put it, like an otherworldly flurry. Like, it's something about the dynamic personality and something about his perception. But yeah, I believe that he's one of the people who can hear these echoes.
Yeah, I remember that story, and it's one of my favorites too. I really like that connection between the two characters, and there's something about them, and you can tell that when you're really involved in the story, the writer really lives or feels this. It's when you feel it.
Alicia, you want to hear a funny story about that story?
Yeah, please, yeah.
So my friend, we'd hung out in our 20s, kind of we'd kept writing to each other. And then as things do in the pre-internet days, we kind of just stopped writing, fell out of contact. And I just published that story in an anthology by Dark Minds Press. And I got this email out of the blue saying, "Hey, are you the Tracy I used to hang out with back in Europe, early 90s? And I suddenly realized, A, this was my friend returned to me, but B, I then had to explain to my friend, I've just written and published a story about you. How do you feel about that?"
Yeah.
Because when I wrote it, I never thought I'd see him again.
True.
And I thought, oh yeah, this is part of my autobiography I can happily use, know.
Yeah.
So then, but he read it and he loved it, and he's a big fan of my writing now.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, you never know how. Yeah, it's an experience from the past.
But he actually believes that I conjured him back into being again by writing the story.
Wow. Nice. It's really a nice story. Right. So there's you connected to the uncanny. There's something that you mentioned in your book that you like to associate. I thought that was quite interesting. The color green with the uncanny. I thought that was an interesting comment, and also because the virus that we're living with nowadays is painted all with green. So is that a coincidence?
I would like to state I did not cause coronavirus. But no, I mean, I should mention my amazing publishers at this point, Sinister Horror Company, because Justin Park, who I've worked with now on a couple of my books, he's incredibly intuitive kind of editor and publisher.
Yeah.
So I'd mentioned in a throwaway comment once that I always thought of the uncanny as green. So the first cover he brought to me to look at, he was using those colours that he'd drawn from me in conversation. And I have to say, if you've got the cover, please hold it up because I love it. It's so simple for the Unheimlich maneuver. It's just this fragmented house, and it's such a simple and very powerful image. Yeah. I just fell in love with it. But yeah, it's green for uncanny and it's black for darkness.
Yeah, it's great. It makes sense, and it takes you also back. It takes me back to the Green Knight when we have the folklore and the medieval folklore, and we have the Green Knight with all the. It's true. The green has all this symbology, doesn't it? Nature and they're very strong.
There's also an entity that allegedly lives in the river in Limerick called the Green Lady, who pulls children to their doom.
Right. Yeah. It's another culture, right? About this lady that La Llorona, is it? That she cries because of her children, and she takes kids and she drowns them, which is horrible.
I know.
But there are varieties of the same myth or the same icon or the same creature. There are varieties throughout different cultures.
I remember being at a conference and talking about the Green Lady as this Limerick entity. And there was a researcher there from Manchester, Dr. Maura Groves, who was presenting on Manchester canals. And in the Manchester Canal, there was a woman called Ginny Greenteeth, who again stole children. So we're going, it's amazing. We find these stories, these migratory legends, you know, everywhere.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Yeah. There's, for you, I see that there are like three, there are probably more, but the 3 points or themes that you keep going and revisiting are the dreams, which are also the points and the elements I really like too. The elements of the dreams, the memory, and obviously the home is the thing that you really talk about from many different angles. So is, well, we've talked about the house already, but about the other elements, about dreams and memory, we have to say that the personal experience there, if we can explain or we can talk about what you went through health-wise, is really what detonated these working on or visiting these elements, or was that there before your health issues? Was it something that just latent there, but it just became stronger?
Yeah, I think I've always been fascinated by dreams since I was a child, as this other realm that you could visit every night. It was just such a weird and strange idea, like Gothic land, I guess. And as a child, I suffered from absolutely terrifying nightmares. It's partly my own fault because I was really attracted to everything to do with terror, but I was also a really nervous child. So it was a terrible combination. So I always had this kind of anticipation and fear before dreaming because so frequently they would turn out to be nightmares. But memory is something that fascinates me because I'm quite obsessed with the fact that every time we remember something, we're remembering the last time that we remembered it, rather than the occasion itself or the object itself. So in the Gothic, as you know, of course, there is this real trope of the unreliable narrator. the person that you're not sure is telling the truth or not. But in my writing, what I'm most interested in is this person telling the truth to themselves or not.
Yeah.
Because I think that we live on so many layers, and there are so many opposing voices in our heads sometimes that it's quite difficult to know, what am I really experiencing? What am I really thinking about? What am I really afraid of? How do I feel about this?
Yeah.
And I think once you add in memory, once you add in layers of age on top of that, everything becomes distorted. And by becoming distorted, it becomes more interesting, and the questions become more urgent. What is true and what is false?
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? The brain, as you say, the memory, the dreaming, the brain itself, it's something that fascinates me. For me, recently I was telling one of my students, I think the soul, if it's anyways in the brain. And she looked at me like, don't say that, because I am a believer and I think that, free will and that then God. And I'm like, after I saw my husband going through an ictus and he wasn't himself, there was something gone. His brain was working. He was being very logical. His logical self was there, but his spirit, his soul, his essence wasn't there for a while. And that, for me, that was so scary, because it was like getting home someone I didn't know. And for him, he was prisoner of his own body and his own mind. And it's so powerful for me. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in neuroscience right now, and connecting the Gothic mind from a scientific point of view, and really worried or really into critical thinking as well, because let's deconstruct the Gothic if we can from a scientific point of view, even though I'm not a scientist, seeing and experiencing that yourself as you know it can just go boom, because your brain's go boom. You could be missing an arm, you could be missing half a liver, but you're still you. But your brain is this thing that we still don't know, as you said before, is this machine that controls everything. And maybe our soul is there. If that doesn't work and it goes, that's it. And most of your abilities, your speech, your language skills, your perception, it goes away. So
I think that any kind of a trauma, like a trauma of the brain or a trauma of the body, leads to this sense of disassociation, and if you undergo a big trauma, and everybody has, there is a sense of the person before and the person after.
Yeah.
And those people are never quite the same, because everything that you've held dear has been kind of called into question. It has changed. So the question then becomes, how do you rebuild a different life after a trauma? And I think that's really, really very much the case with the kind of medical trauma you're describing. And I'm so sorry that Alistair went through that and you went through that, because
it was horrible, but we've learned so much. And in a way, he's become more Gothic because of that. He's had to learn, which is one of the things that maybe is missing from part of the society or part of society of some people, that we put on one side death when it's actually something that lives with us constantly.
I mean, in my other life as a researcher, I've also worked on death cafes, which are a Swiss phenomenon. But I was working with a psychotherapist and an artist, and the idea was to have these venues where people come together, and in this kind of safe space. The rules of Death Cafe is there must be cake, there have to be hot, nourishing drinks. But essentially what's created during the Death Cafe is a space where people can talk about death, because it's something that we've tried to wipe out of modern society. Death has become antiseptic. It happens in the hospital. It doesn't happen in the home. People don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Even in Ireland, where people, are famous for their wakes and their funerals, and they talk about the dead and so many stories, but before death, they're very quiet. So I am a believer that we should embrace death, not in a negative way, but to see it rather as the Death Cafe movement see it as an acknowledgement that life is finite, and that therefore life should be enjoyed and it should be celebrated.
That's beautiful.
So, well, I think in a way being Gothic is to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think that's why, we have to recommend people to know more about the Gothic. For you, Gothic is a place where we can exercise our demons. It's a place we can learn from. So for you, if you have to say to someone that doesn't know about the Gothic, would you say that it's an area that would comfort, that would give answers? Is the Gothic a place we can learn from, something to study, something to, a place to give more credibility and treat it maybe less from it's entertainment, but it's more than entertainment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that the Gothic makes us think, because Gothic literature is not an easy or straightforward read. Often there are different layers of meaning. There are different ways that you can kind of construct the experiences or interpret them. But I think the Gothic it's a very rich genre, and it really rewards careful reading. But I just read it because it's marvelous. I mentioned Shirley Jackson, but the beautiful language that Angela Carter employs, for example. I love kind of contemporary writers like Priya Sharma and B.H. Leslie, Georgina Bruce, Alison Littlewood. All of those, to my mind, have this amazing sense of the Gothic about them. And I mentioned a lot of female writers, so also male writers like James Everington as well, Stephen Bacon, who have that wonderful sensitivity, that kind of nuanced approach, that idea of a half glimpsed or half sensed terror.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. What would you say, Tracy? What would you say to a new writer? That I've been trying to. I've got my little stories, but I'm not serious about publishing yet. I'm still very scared. But what would you say to someone that, like me in my case, is my second language or it's a third language because it's Spanish, then Catalan, then English? Although sometimes I think more in English than in Spanish. It's really weird. But what would you say to someone like, for example, myself, who's got all these, the impostor syndrome before writing? Because it's great. It's a great place for me. It's a great place to explore what I feel, to write down my thoughts. But then maybe why not take it to the next level and let other people enjoy what you write to? What would you tell people like me that is our second language, and also that, first-time writers?
Okay, I would say stop thinking too much about it. No, really. I mean, a great writer that I've worked with before, Margaret Helgadottir, is Norwegian Icelandic. She writes in English, her second language, and her voice is quite unique because of that. So I would say, don't think too much about, it's my second language, I have nothing to say, etc. I would say just put your voice out there, because it's important to try it, because otherwise you just kind of sit on these stories and you hold them to yourself and nobody else gets the benefit. So I started off just submitting to anthologies. And that's wonderful because especially if you work kind of in the horror or Gothic genre, you work with a lot of small presses. Yeah. And they are the most generous, wonderful people I know, because they take the time to give feedback, which is, again, how you learn. But also then it just puts you in a different circle. I would say when coronavirus lifts, go to writing conventions, cons, because they're amazing social places where you will get to chat to writers who you really admire on a very informal way, where you can listen to panels where people are discussing things like, how do you start off as a writer? What's the first big step? You know, no matter what genre you're interested in, crime, domestic noir, pulp horror, there will be a panel about it, you know, there will be experts talking about it. But above all, I would say, do not listen to Impostor Syndrome, because I was talking today with Penny Jones, who's an English horror writer, and she's had a short story, a collection, and an anthology that she's in, all nominated for British Fantasy Awards this year. And she was talking about, oh, I don't really feel, you know, what I'm doing is, you know, very successful. And I just started laughing. And I said, see, imposter syndrome never goes away, you know.
It's true.
And a special message to women, which is, please put your writing out there. Because 2 years ago, Justin Park and I were co-editing an anthology, the Black Room manuscripts. And in our open call, I'd say it was about 20% female writers. Wow. who answered to the open call, because I think female writers sometimes think a bit too much of, oh, is this story a perfect fit? Oh, I'm not very confident about this. And I would urge women to have the confidence of male writers and, you know, put as much work out there.
That's great. That's great. This is actually what you are working on next. Yes, it's taking us to your in a couple of months we have your new book out in the market, and it's you concentrated on women, on the body, I think it's fantastic, because we do not have a lot of this. I don't think. Maybe now we're getting more of this type of literature, but we were talking about it recently on this other radio program about just talking about loss when you're losing a child or a fetus or a few days.
Yeah.
You know, a bunch of cells there, and we do not speak out. Motherhood seems to be a wonderful thing. But really, giving birth is the most atrocious experience and painful. If you suffer pain, obviously some women love it, and it looks like for them it's just like they give birth and it's fantastic, another one. But in most, it's a traumatizing experience for the mother, for the child. Your body is distorted, and it looks like you are going to go onto those lines in your next. I'm trying to see if I can get some information.
I'm so happy to talk about it, because I've been working for the last 2 years on this. Wow. And yes, you're right. The germ of it does come from earlier stories like The Woman Next Door, because as I said, horror for me is quite mundane. You know, true horror for me is very ordinary. And I always seem to write about things that are almost autoethnographic. You know, they have this mirror, they have this kind of parallel to experiences. And I know simply by being a woman and being born into this body, that this body brings with it vulnerabilities. You know, it's a smaller, weaker body than most male bodies. It's more vulnerable to violence. It's more likely to be assaulted. It's more likely to die as a result of domestic violence. But then also when we think of our bodies, we think of the rituals of puberty, menstruation, you know, childbirth, perimenopause, menopause. There are all these rituals of the body that women go through, that are kind of just very visceral. They're rituals of blood. They're almost primeval. And so I guess in this collection, I was just trying to talk about the horror that emanates from being a woman. Yeah. You know, these kind of physical and mental anxieties that arise from being female. Yeah. That was really the start. I mean, the collection goes to all kinds of strange places, but ultimately that's what it keeps coming back to.
It's great, and I think it's something I'm going to really enjoy reading. that I'm going to highly recommend to my students. I'm not going to stop recommending you to my students. We can work on your stories, because it's great to work on the language in context, and obviously from the place I really love, and the place and the way you use it is fantastic. I have to say, there's one book I haven't read and I need to buy myself for Christmas, New Music for All Rituals, and that's next. And in your new book, I'm really looking forward to reading that as well. And I'm really happy for you, because you're doing great and you're doing fantastic things. You're helping out, this idea of helping other people with your writings, through your writings, to maybe overcome like their own experiences with health, with their own fears, with horror, but also, giving tips and through your stories. Maybe someone in a dark place at the moment might read one of your stories and they'll go, well, mine is actually more scary than that, but I can relate. And yes, just for the simple fact that someone else is going through something similar, now I feel better. So have you ever thought about your books being just something that can help others?
It's so weird, Lucy. I have to say, when I wrote my first book, this sounds really naive, but I never thought of anyone reading it. It was all about me writing it and the stories as entities. And it was astonishing and humbling and terrifying when I went into the world and people started reading it and saying things about it. And then I just realized that it's your book up to that point when you put it out there, because then it becomes everybody's book and everybody has their own interpretations. And yes, I mean, I love it when people tell me something that they found in it, like you did this evening with Let Me In. Yeah. I mean, I was brought up in the Brontes, so obviously that came out of me unconsciously, but you pointed it out. So it's always really interesting for me when people take different things out. And yes, I think the most common reaction is indignation when somebody I know says, I read that and it really frightened me.
Yeah, but that's good, because they reacted.
Do that to the character. Like,
they reacted. So that's the thing. They were not just like, oh, well, another story. They were like, they got affected, and that's good, isn't it?
I guess so.
It's brilliant. Well, I've loved this, but I think that we could be talking about the Gothic so much more, and we could concentrate and talk about other aspects. If you want, Tracy, it would be my pleasure to have you again once your new book is released to talk about it.
Actually, and then we could really get into medical Gothic.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm obsessed with the brain, and even though from all the monsters, the zombie is the one I dislike the most. It has its own thing as well, and the brain. Why do zombies like the brain? And I wrote an article about it. I don't know if you remember. It's actually...
Yes, you did. and I really empathized with it, because I find the zombie the most colorless of all the great monsters. But there was one amazing zombie series called In the Flesh, an English series shot in Manchester, which does something quite unusual with the idea of the zombie. It represents zombies as essentially people who have been kind of reclaimed from their zombie state and who are suffering from a very acute form of PTSD.
Right.
And that for me was really interesting, because that's the zombie with the brain restored, and then all the guilt that brings, the memory of the terrible things that you did when you were kind of in this kind of state of brain death.
Wow, that's
really interesting.
I'll have to read that. Yeah, I didn't know about it. Yes, I'll have to read it. So interesting. So much to say, so much to talk about. No. But if you want, we'll when your new book is released, we have another chat.
Anytime.
It's been a pleasure, Tracy. I really appreciate you, my first guest, and I'm sure that people are going to find a lot of useful information. They can actually see a real author that talks about the book. So so approachable in such an approachable way as you do, and I'm so happy that you're my friend as well. So
me too. And for And for anybody who's interested, I'm on Twitter at Tracy Fahey. I'm on Instagram as Misty for Girls, after the great paranormal English comic. And my website is simply tracyfahey.com. So I'm always really happy to hear from readers and writers and other creatives.
That'd be great. We always, I always encourage people to talk, to leave their messages and their comments. So it's great that I will post everything on when I upload the video on YouTube. I will give your references there as well, so they can follow you. And let's hope that people have questions. They have questions for you. Maybe another day we could do a live show and they can ask directly questions and talk to you directly. That would be also wonderful. So if you are up for that, then I'm in.
Why not? It's always a pleasure talking with you, Lucia. And I love our Gothic conversations.
It's great. Thank you very much. Well, don't go. I'm going to switch off now for the audience, but don't go, and I'll have a quick word with you at the end of the show after a little bit evaluation. But again, thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.